Hi everyone, hope you're doing good. Just adjusting my camera a little bit is not in the right place. Hi, how is everyone doing? Hope you're having a really good day. I'm just making sure that everything is working okay over here. So let me just check that the PowerPoint is all fine, which I think it should be. But yeah, if you guys could let me know in the chat that you can hear me and see me all fine, that would be all groovy. And we will be starting properly in 5 minutes. So, we still have time, so no worries. Hey, Kathleen, thank you, Diane and Eric, for letting me know. I'm glad to see things are working fine. Welcome, Dominic. How are you doing? Thank you for being here. Hope you're all having a really, really lovely day. And yeah, well, I can't believe we've come so far in our journey with art history, and it's almost already over. It's feels like ages, and I guess it has been. It's been for weeks now. I can't believe how fast time is going, guys. It's holiday season already, and wow. Hey, Anne, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining. And hi, everybody that's just arriving into the meeting. We still have 5 minutes to go, so don't worry, you've not missed anything at all. So you can still get comfortable. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. The chat is going to be open now for a little while, so you're very welcome to make use of it. The weather here is actually okay, Dominic. The wind is still out and about. It's not been as bad as on Saturday. Saturday was particularly nasty. In fact, after the tour that we had on Saturday, by the way, if you were with me on tour on Saturday, thank you so much for being so kind about the gimbal. Literally, I got here maybe an hour after we finished the tour, and it just started pouring rain really dramatically with very nasty wind. We had very nasty wind last night as well. Um, but it seems to be worst at sort of sundown or sunset. So it's kind of funny. But other than the wind, the weather is lovely. We were at 25 degrees today, which for the middle of November is, I can't really complain. I hear that in the UK, I'm gonna be down at 10 degrees, which is not so nice. So one of those things. But no, the weather here has been really good overall. And yeah, it's definitely been very interesting experiencing Malta from that way. But I've been told that the type of weather we've been having in Malta for the last few weeks is not normal either. So, please do not take this as gospel advertisement that if you come to Malta in November, it's gonna be beautiful, because I think everybody's quite surprised. But there you go. It's been pretty good. And hi, everybody that's just been joining. We have 3.5 minutes until we get started properly. And if you're joining us over from YouTube, hello to you as well. Very, very good to have you here in the house. And well, since we have a little bit of time, let me tell you what's happening or what's coming up in the next few weeks. So today we finish with art history, and remember that you have a week to watch the replay, so make sure that you don't miss that. And then on the 23rd we start with the Normans, which is my last group course of the year. We will be doing that all the way to the 14th of December. I decided most people probably didn't want to do courses in Christmas time. So there you go. Other than that, from me here in World Virtual Tours, you are gonna be seeing a few sessions from me next month. We have the Golden Age of Spain, part 6 and 7, which is what we're missing. So we will be able to finish them properly. And we also have a pre-recorded walking tour of Lisbon, where I was in this summer, and the brief history of the UK in under 1 hour. That's the very last talk I'm giving this year, which is quite interesting, because that's actually happening, I think, on New Year's Eve or the day before New Year's Eve. I don't know. I work New Year's Eve, guys, so it's an ordinary day for me from that perspective. But yeah, so we have just a minute and a half until we get started. Hello, everybody that's just been joining. Welcome to the class. Hope you're doing good. Hey, Harnadi, how are you doing? Thank you for joining us from the Netherlands. How is it going over there? Hope you're doing really good. 23rd here is Thanksgiving. Yes, I did notice that I always miss Thanksgiving by a day or two. I never get it right, and I know it should be so easy, but when you're not used to these kind of things, it's hard. It was the same the other day with Diwali. I know a lot of people who miss things because of the celebration. So I know that the holidays are always tricky, but it's okay. Hi Linda, welcome. How are you? Welcome Maggie from the what? Netherlands. I I'm sorry. I wish I could send you some of the dryness from Malta because it's been very dry. I think they could use a tiny bit of rain. I'm not gonna say a lot of rain. I don't want the Maltese getting upset with me. But a tiny bit of rain. And well, guys, we're gonna be starting in literally just under a minute, 30 seconds, according to my timer. So be ready. I hope you are joining me in the comfort of your homes quite happily. And well, we will wrap this up. I have some questions though for when we get started. So this is gonna be a mix of questions and things from you guys, and then kind of more lecture style. So there's gonna be a bit more interaction. Welcome, Susan. How are you doing? Thank you so much for being here. And okay, it's officially time to get started. So hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing really good, and welcome to our last session on the art history Renaissance masters in Italy. My name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, in case you don't know me, and it is doctor because I have a PhD in history from the University of Winchester. And everything that we've been doing over for the last 3 weeks leads up to this class that we're doing today, which is about contextualizing and revising some aspects of what we've learned. So just a general overview there from that perspective. Now, in the chat, you have the links for any of the upcoming tours, the things that I was just mentioning a moment ago, as well as for the donations, so you can keep on supporting the Academy and World Virtual Tours through PayPal and Stripe. It's been an honor hosting you here, and as always, I'm very glad whenever you allow me to rant about these things. So thanks for that, and thanks for keeping us going, guys, because we've been World Virtual Tours has now been going for a really long time, and it's an honor and a pleasure to see such a dynamic community that keeps on growing, as well as the familiar faces that is always wonderful to actually see. Well, the chat is going to remain open now for a little while, because as I start with this talk today, I want to ask you some questions. So first of all, and feel very free in the chat to ask any queries, any thoughts, any things that you need clarification, maybe from the previous weeks that maybe you just want me to clarify. You're very welcome to do that now while we sort of warm up. So the chat is still open, and it will remain open for a little while in this case. So if you have any questions, please fire away before I start with my questions for you. So while you have a think about whether or not you need anything clarifying, I'm just gonna drink some water. And why did the master of the Renaissance mix pagan and Christian themes in their works inside? Well, and this is a wonderful question, and I'm very glad that you asked. It's kind of something we will revise a little bit over today, so this is perfect. So remember, guys, that during the Renaissance, we are experiencing innovations and changes in society. And one of those innovations, or perhaps one of those changes in society, is looking back at Greco-Roman traditions, the rebirth in a way of ancient Greece and Rome, which is kind of what Renaissance means, rebirth. So in those particular, contextual periods of history, pagan times were dominant. Of course, there will be Christian religion in Roman times, but the majority of the thematic is going to be pagan, because their mythology, even from a Christian perspective, is going to be pagan. So the ideas are essentially going to merge. Mythology is always a beautiful source of inspiration, for artists of any kind. I'm not just talking about painters or sculpture makers, whatever, musicians, writers, etc. So in that sense, they are gonna, come in together from different perspectives. The specific issue about them being mixed in places of Christian worship has many different readings. On the one side, we have the fact that particularly at this moment in time in Europe, with the split in the Catholic Church, with the Protestant and the Catholic Church fighting each other, a lot of images of paganism were essentially moralizing. They were kind of trying to do the work for the church, as to say, this pagan doctrine or this pagan idea is wrong, because it in many ways, pagan ideologies get demonized during the medieval period and later on during Renaissance period as well. So often that's why we see them in Christian worship settings, because they are supposed to moralize us about something we shouldn't do or something we should know better about. Another idea is that, Christianity has in the end, to come back to its roots, right? Consider that, for example, in ancient Rome, Christianity was considered a cult. So connecting back with those roots and bringing the Christian context to a more down-to-earth or relatable setting through paganism in the ancient ways is a way of humanizing religion. And remember that during this time period, we're going to be experiencing the rise of humanism, which is important from the point of view of philosophical understanding of the subject. So those are some of the reasons and why there is a mix. It's not always clear cut, because as you guys know, I'm sure you've come to learn about this by now. Art often has many interpretations and it's often based on conventions. So what may have made sense then at the time doesn't necessarily make sense for us now. But those are normally the two most common readings for the majority of this mix between the two. And of course, there is always the possibility of just sheer inspiration for the sake of, beautifying history, essentially. So I hope that makes some sense. And if not, please do let me know. Any more questions from previous weeks or that you would like me to clarify before we move on into the questions that I have for you? Please fire away. The chat is open. I'm just going to have to keep on hydrated because I've been talking quite a lot today. Right. So anyway, I'm gonna keep on moving forward, but like I said, the chat is open for now. Any questions, please feel free to fire ahead. So I just want to sort of do a little bit of a check to see if we are understanding Renaissance better and to help us understand some of these concepts and why things can be sometimes a bit elusive. So I have here some philosophical questions for you guys. So after what you've learned for the last few weeks, when do you think the Renaissance happened? Like, what period do you associate with the Renaissance, first of all? Where does the Renaissance happen? Have you noticed a specific pattern from a geographical perspective? What would you guys say in your own words Renaissance is? And is it fair to call it a rebirth, as the word sort of suggests? These are my questions for you. You can ponder through them. You are welcome. Like I said, the chat is open, so please do let me know what you think, because once we start talking about these things, the context of Renaissance art will make a lot of sense, particularly in the when and the where. So any thoughts or any ideas that anyone has about any of them? Linda, late 1400s to mid 1500s. Okay, that's a very good answer. And I'm glad to see that answer, but we are about to challenge that for a reason. Is there any reason why you think of those dates, Linda? Just curiosity. Diane, Italy. Okay, perfect. Melissa, the late 1500s to the 1600s. Interesting. Again, any specific reasons, Diane, as to for why Italy, and the same for you, Melissa? Dominic, until 1600, and Spain and Italy. Okay, good. So I can see lots of thoughts, all of which, by the way, none of you are actually wrong. And that's what's going to make this perhaps a little bit confusing. What is Renaissance though? What about the other two questions? I feel that we're not looking at this side of the slide because it's a bit more prickly maybe. Kathleen, primarily 1500s and 1500s in Europe, particularly Italy. Rebirth, yes. Okay, very very thorough question. Thank you, Kathleen. It's very kind for you to give it so much thought. Most artists we have studied are Italian, 100%. But that's, as you're gonna find out, Diane, I've been tricking you all along. I've been setting up the biggest trap, but I promise it would all make sense in a moment. Pat, the early 1500s until the early 1600s, mostly Italy. Excellent. Western Europe, nice. No, yes. Well, the reason why I'm asking these questions, of course, is because as you guys know, and I think I'm always as open as I can with these things, is, history is an elusive thing, right? And art the same. We as humans and as historians, we like putting sticky labels over everything to understand, right? The world around us, our reality. But the reality of events is that a lot of the concepts and ideas that we normally have and work with, not just for Renaissance, but for most art specifically, actually come from the 19th century. And those of you who have done the Norse, the Vikings with me, will realize a trend forming in here. Well, part of the reason behind that is because, the 19th century is going to be important for the foundation of ideology and nation making for most countries. And in Italy specifically, this is going to be the moment when Italy becomes unified. Because we've been talking about Italy, but did Italy exist during the Renaissance? Well, we're gonna start answering some of these questions just now. I just want to catch up with the chat very quickly. 12th century. Oh, I'm very glad to see that in there. Thank you. Thank you for that, Julia. This is gonna be interesting. It ushered with the scientific revolution. Yes, very good, Wendy. Okay, good. I'm glad to see these things. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna close the chat temporarily so we can start clarifying some of these things, and then I'll open up the chat again because I have more questions. So let's let's see where my mouse has gone. Excellent. Italy 1400s. Good, good, good. Okay, well, here comes the unveiling of all of these ideas. So let's start talking about the context, because there is no point talking about art if we don't understand context, right? This is the reason, and perhaps some of you may think I'm really annoying for this, but this is the reason why when we talk about any of these pieces of art, I don't just give you the technical details. I like you to understand the circumstances under which those pieces of art were created, because art without context is just pretty, and art is not just pretty. It's supposed to have a message. It's supposed to be something else, right? Well, so the first thing we need to understand is Italy, because we've been using the word Italy to refer to these Italian masters. But of course, Italy did not exist during the period we've been studying. The reality of events is that, well, the area that we now know as Italy, as a unified country, which happens in the 19th century, was essentially a conglomeration of city republics. So there are going to be two special moments in Italy during the period we've been talking about, before 1559 and after. So here you have a map of what the area of Italy looked like on the left before the changes. So as you can see, many different places. All of these places, of course, are fighting for power. And it's something that you're going to see comes from a really long time ago when we start studying the Normans in a couple next week. So these city republics essentially work as, organizational administrations, and then we have the very special case of the papal states. So consider that nowadays the papal state is just the Vatican and is one of the smallest states in the whole world. But back in the day, the Pope actually controlled a lot of territory around Italy or otherwise in other places of Europe. So, Rome was not just Rome, it was much more than that. So as a result, there are going to be a lot of defining factors for all of these different factions. There is going to be lots of different things that would influence every single region to behave or to develop things in a specific way. But overall, the geographical area of modern-day Italy will also have certain issues. And war is going to be a very common issue. The 14th century specifically is going to see the loss of a lot of city-states in regards to their independence. So if you look, for example, from the left to the right, you're going to notice that by 1559, some parts of the map that were previously colored of a certain way, they are no longer that way. And that's because, well, some places grew, some places lost power. Look at the Republic of Siena, bye-bye. Florence ate it all from that regards, just to give you a very easy example, for example. And as a result, that's going to mean that certain dynamics are going to change. Some people with more power are going to have more economic input. Some people with less power are going to see a change in culture and a change in, well, the general development of their society. So what else happens in not just Italy, but in the world in the 14th century that's going to have a huge impact? And I know many of you already know from our lecture in World Virtual Tours, the Black Death, right? The Black Death hits everywhere around 1346 to 53. And that's going to have a huge impact in our mentality and, of course, in our way of life, as well as in our population. And all of these things will impact art. So something else to add into the mix. And like I said, because of the general power dynamics of Italy, lots of war. We have the Condottiero Wars. We've spoken about the Condottiero a couple of times. Condottiero are these military men, military factions. But unlike most military factions in Europe at the time, which are mercenaries, these factions are normally associated with specific places of power, normally the ruling families of these city-states. So it's going to be very bloody. It's almost a state of constant civil war. But not just that. Italy, or the Italian states, were not the only people that wanted Italy for their gain, right? Because if you're looking into the kingdom of Sicily, Palermo, and Sardinia, who actually owned that? Spain. And you would remember this perhaps from the Golden Age. You see how all of the things we learn in World Virtual Tours end up all tying in together, right? Well, of course, half of these territories were Spanish. And look where France is coming. And then the Holy Roman Empire, which is what you see in there, the Sant Imperi. There's a lot of people who want a piece of this pie. So actually, for the vast majority of the 1500s, the 16th century is going to be a constant state of conflict that we know as the Italian Wars. And we call it the Italian Wars because there was the Italian Wars of this decade, the Italian War of the next decade, the Italian Wars of the late, and it's like that 24/7 until the moment when we get to 1559 and things sort of come to a stalemate, and that's why the dynamic changes. And that dynamic change, well, is going to have a general impact in people. The other thing that's happening in Europe at this moment in time, and that Italy is going to be very influenced by, is the rise of urbanization. Whether it is because of the Black Death, whether it is because of the development of artillery, which some of you have also learned with me elsewhere in Europe at this moment in time, you know, urban centers, cities and towns are going to start generating their own dynamics. And in Italy, because of the abundance of wealth and money that some of these republics are going to have, that's going to create new opportunities. So in many ways, the Renaissance in Italy happens because there are lots of opportunities that create a perfect breeding ground, if you see what I mean. But it's not as simple as it seems, because to the majority of people, the Renaissance didn't happen. You know, it's something we must always be careful with these ideas, because the Renaissance only really was applicable to a very specific population, to the upper classes. For the ordinary commoner, no much really changed from, you know, medieval Europe all the way to Industrial Revolution, I must be honest. So is it really a Renaissance if it affects such a small percentage of the population? From a perspective, yes, but you know, Overall, not so much. Well, the other thing is we tend to think of the Renaissance as a period, right? As a specific moment set in time. But as we've been discussing on the chat, there are many different dates, right? Those dates change. It's not like it's 1 century or something like that. So I like to think of the Renaissance more as a set of innovations, maybe rather than a period of history, because that's a bit more flexible and that allows us to realize that, well, things develop in a very specific way, but not necessarily in the pace of, linear continuity with timelines that fit so nicely and crisp. So there are going to be lots of firsts, lots of changes that happen for the first time in Italy at this moment in time. Okay. And the other thing, of course, is we've been talking about Italy, 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 but did the Renaissance only happen in Italy? Is this Italy? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure some of you would identify some of these artists, I am sure, but these are some of the most important Renaissance artists from the Netherlands. On the right-hand side, you have Banik, and on the left-hand side, you have Peter Bruegel, who we, well, can reference once again due to the Black Death. So it's very different art, right? In terms of what we've been seeing in the last few weeks. Is it better? Is it worse? Is it equally worthy? What's the scoring there? This is the reason why I prefer thinking about the Renaissance as a general set of innovations and not specifically, a place or a time, but a movement of ideas. And movements hardly ever are crystal clear cut. In some cases they are, but often there is a lot of transition and there's lots of different periods. And that's actually something we're going to see in the Renaissance, specifically in Italy, because is it Italy or is it a specific part of Italy? Now, you may be recalling, right? Where did Leonardo do a lot of his work? Well, Leonardo is interesting because he moves a lot. But where did Michelangelo and Raphael do the majority of their work? The majority of these people all hail from one specific region in Italy, right? Tuscany. Well, now let's start thinking about the context of how we get to those innovations. Why are they innovations? And do they happen like that overnight? No. So this is the inception point. These two paintings that you're looking at are actually from the 13th century. So we were mentioning briefly the Middle Ages. So these two are from the 13th century, and they are from perhaps the two artists that are going to start setting art apart from the trend in Tuscany. On the left-hand side, you have Cimabue, and on the right-hand side, you have Duccio. And these two artists, both from the area of Tuscany, are going to break away from what at the time were the typical conventions of Byzantine culture. Now, imagine this. After the fall of Rome, Byzantium becomes the light of art and technology, right? They are still the Eastern Roman Empire, and they will survive for a lot longer. Because of this Roman tradition and this heritage that they developed, they are going to have a huge impact, and I mean huge impact in art specifically for a long period of time. So a lot of medieval art in specific parts of Europe, Italy particularly because of its connection to the Roman Empire, is still going to be dictated by Byzantine doctrines and tendencies. So everything is very formulaic. Now, these two guys are going to start breaking away from these trends and starting to give this type of art a different setting, a different spark of life. Why Tuscany, though? How is it that all of these things and all of these artists come from Tuscany? Well, the thing is, Tuscany is a very privileged area of Italy at this moment in time. Over its history, it's not been an area that has been very highly contested. So it's provided a certain degree of security. The people that end up building power in the area of Tuscany, particularly by the later Middle Ages, are going to be noble families, which will eventually rise to be the leaders of the Republic of Florence. So Florence and Tuscany in this case are, synonymous. And that's where we're going to see the Medici family rising up to power properly in the 1400s. And not just that, Tuscany is a very fertile land. It's an area where industry develops very well. Remember the Ciompi from the Black Death, the textile workers that rebel. So it's an area that can live from many different things. And it's not necessarily, like I said, fighting a very strong borders all the time. They will have rivalries, of course, with different people, but they will have a pretty solid ground from where to depart from. Well, on top of that, by some miracle, because this is not something we can really quantify, there seems to be an abundance of people with creative talent in Tuscany at this moment in time. So from the two people that we've just looked at, Simaue and Duccio, we have a step further. So the following century, on the move from the 13th to the 14th century, a new player is going to come into the story, and this is going to be Giotto. And in fact, normally when we speak about Renaissance art in the wide scheme of things, we say that the Renaissance starts with Giotto as proto-Renaissance. So the step before the deal itself, if you see what I mean. Well, Giotto himself is going to be a student of Cimabue. So some of those original changes are going to take even further shape here. And I think perhaps this piece of art in the Scrovegni Chapel reflects what Giotto does so beautifully, that will really shape and start changing the art of the Renaissance. What you see here, by the way, is a piece of art that is now considered UNESCO as of 2021. It's become part of UNESCO heritage. And this is where we see the change from traditional Gothic art. So we could still say this is Gothic in the wider sense of the story, but this is no longer Gothic, despite being roughly around the same time period. Not a full 100 years have passed from the creation of some of these pieces of art to the other. And of course, in many other parts of Europe, the 1300s are still Gothic. Think of the beautiful Gothic cathedrals that we have all over. How can it be? How can these two things coexist at the same time? Well, it's because of these trends sometimes take longer or shorter to boil and to develop. And in this case, well, Giotto will really push the accelerator. Now, what Giotto does in here is that he changes the conventions. He starts using figures that are three-dimensional, not necessarily in terms of they look like 3D, but three-dimensional from the point of view of their humanity, of the way they interact as themselves and with us. They have more expression. They are not so, completely impassible from that regard. More than that, it's not just the people. The gestures are more realistic. The clothes hang like clothes rather than that typical Byzantine drapery, which is very obviously, every single Virgin Mary in Byzantine history has always had the same brooch, the same cloak. You know what I mean? This man starts giving some more individual touches to the paintings to make them look more equal to us from the point of view of our perspective. And the one thing that he also does is he starts creating the idea of space. Again, if I look back, there is not really much of space creation here. Everything is very flat. Of course, in the second painting, you can see that there is space in the sense of we have a rock in here, there is the sea, and then there is a boat. But that's it. You don't feel like you could reach into this painting because it's a two-dimensional image. Here, there is more dynamism. And part of the way in which Giotto does this is by creating these almost theater-like sets. We call them because they almost look like stage scenes. And the way he does that is by grouping people in such a way that it helps with the narrative. But what makes it look like we have space and gives it depth is the fact that, as you can see, not everybody in this painting is looking at us, right? Some of them are giving us their back. So it's no longer like in typical Gothic images where everything happens right in front of our eyes looking at us. Now we have a different perspective and a different dynamic. So this is how the Tuscan miracle begins with its proto-Renaissance. But it's not just from one thing to another, guys, because what Giotto does starts taking, foothold. And this is going to be a very famous painting by Masaccio, which often goes under the radar. This was done in 425, not a full century after Giotto. This is the work in the Brancacce Chapel, by the way. But Masaccio was aware of what Giotto had done, and of course, Giotto had started doing those changes from his master. So as you can see, one artist after the other starts, it's like twisting the twist, pulling one step further until you get so far away from the original image. Well, this is how Renaissance art starts looking more like Renaissance to us in the 1400s. But is it just Masaccio? No. This is, of course, the Basilica del San Lorenzo by Brunelleschi. Now, Brunelleschi was active, or well, he lived between 1377 to 1466, nearly a whole century. So, at the beginning of the stages of making this basilica, we are literally going over from the 1300s to the 1400s. I'm sure we can all agree this is not Gothic architecture. Where does Brunelleschi get the idea for this? Well, Brunelleschi, just like this other gentleman, which is of course Donatello, is at the same time in Rome gonna start studying antiques for the perfection of their own art. They're gonna go to this beautiful Greco-Roman heritage that they have at their doorstep to study it and to try to get inspiration and improve themselves as artists. So while it's true that in Tuscany things were brewing and moving, it was not in isolation, because as you can see, well, Donatello and Brunelleschi were starting already to spark things up. So the reality of events is that it is true that perhaps in Tuscany we have a higher condensation, but they were sparks everywhere. The difference is that Tuscany will be such an important power because of the Republic of Florence, and the Medici family are going to be so wealthy and so able to control everyone else, including adding extra territory, that they will kind of create a hegemony of their own. Well, this is how the early Renaissance has evolved from Giotto's proto-Renaissance to early Renaissance. I know, crazy. And then we get to the high Renaissance and the great masters. So in actuality and in theory, what we've been studying for the last 3 weeks is what we would call high Renaissance, the peak of that transition, the moment where all of those tendencies have finally crystallized and boom, now we've gotten to the top of it. So that's why I was saying I have kind of been setting a trap. We've been looking at the best of the best, but again, the best of the best from a very specific perspective, from a very Tuscan-centric perspective. Well, we've also been ignoring one man, which I feel guilty for, and therefore I felt I had to, give justice to, which is of course Bramante. We have spoken about architecture, we've spoken about Michelangelo and Raphael and some of their projects, but Bramante is gonna be the great architect of the Renaissance. And in fact, in many ways, we actually say that from the point of view of bringing Renaissance to its height, Italy's highest achievement is in architecture, not in painting or sculpture, because the Netherlands were fighting for, very impressive development of art. France was going under its own thing. Spain, the central states in Germany and Europe, etc., etc. But in architecture specifically, Italy will raise the bar and it will become the dominant tendency because of the work of Bramante, which is heavily influenced by the work of Brunelleschi, which is heavily influenced by the work of Vitruvius in Roman times. So again, as you can see, it's not a change of the light bulb because they could. Things take time, and this is the height of that time. Well, why is it the height of this time? Like I said, there is lots of firsts. There is lots of first ideas that come to be and that allow for this to become a perfect breeding ground. Humanism, the idea that now humans are at the center of the story is going to give us a different push, because humanism is going to be much more centered around the narratives of art that we've been seeing. Not everything is going to be dominated by the Catholic Church. A lot of the pieces of art we've seen previously, right, whether it's been in this lecture or in previous lectures, a lot of it has to do with liturgy. But as we've seen in the High Renaissance, we start seeing more and more elements that are not Catholic at all because of that humanism, but also because of the scientific and technological changes. So one thing that perhaps a lot of people don't realize that happens during the Renaissance is that the printing press became a thing in the late 1400s, and the printing press is going to be revolutionary. Now you'll be thinking, but Lily, what does the printing press have to do with art? Where do you think the knowledge for art comes from? Where are all of these references coming from? From the past. So all of those paintings based on a statue or on a description from Pliny the Elder, the ability of producing books at a higher level in a way that is more accessible for everybody. And not just that, the printing press becomes mobile. So it's not like there was one printing press in one village and that was it. Things could move around. The distribution and dissemination of ideas is easier. And as such, our knowledge of the ancient world, and not just the ancient world, of the medieval world, is much more closer to those people in need or in desire to learn about it than before. So things like that will really change the way that we start seeing the world and the way we start reflecting ourselves. Because remember, I always tell you this, guys, art is not just beautiful, right? Art is not just about making something pretty. Art is a reflection of our lives as people, of our ideas, and of the changes that we see in the world. But of course, the other thing that's going to be super influential, particularly in the High Renaissance onwards, for the development of these three great masters we've been studying and a lot of the art pieces we've seen, is patronage. Patronage is no longer bound to the church. People like Cosimo de' Medici and many other influential families, wealthy bankers, merchants, etc., 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 are going to start commissioning art pieces. And this is just an example here in Italy. Think, for example, 100 years later in the Netherlands, Rembrandt didn't even really need patrons. He would create art on demand that then will bring him patrons, right? So industrialization, even if it's at a lower level, will impact art and the way that we produce it, and it will impact the way we reflect the world around us. So the changes in thematic, the changes in, techniques and whatnot are important in that regards. Well, now I'm gonna start asking some questions, and for that I'm also gonna open the chat. So let me do that. Since I have to do that as well, I will also remind you that now in the chat there are the links for the upcoming tours as well as the donations that you can do through PayPal and Stripe to keep World Tour Tours going. And the chat is now open so that we can explore the next part of the lecture a bit more together, because I've been giving you a bit more of context, but there are still many questions to be answered because, like I said, this is a very Tuscan-centric ideology. What about elsewhere in Italy? Because I'm sure you've noticed we've kind of been ignoring Bellini. I don't know, did any of you knew about Bellini, or for example, some of the other artists that we've been mentioning? The chat is now open and you're welcome to share your ideas. This is what the Venetian School of Art was doing at the same time that Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Is it still worthy of being high masters of the Renaissance? Tell me about it. What about this? Huh? This is Giorgione. Is this not an impeccable piece of art that could rival with potentially, well, I don't know if La Mona Lisa, but definitely something else that we have seen? And again, Giorgione is from the school of Venice. Now, interestingly, Venice and Venetian artists start working much much more with perhaps color rather than the use of space. They have a very different sort of idea of how they operate in that regards. So it's a different take on art. They haven't necessarily developed the same priorities than those Tuscan artists. I can see that there is a comment in the chat, but my Zoom is taking a while to load it. I'll get to you, no worries. What about this? Do you guys know who this famous artist is? Many of you have asked me to do a lecture on him specifically. Now, this is some of his latest pieces of work. This is, of course, Tiziano. Again, another master of Venetian school. And is this not something that could rival with the terribilità of Michelangelo's Last Judgment? Because I see this piece of art and I think, whoa, this is gritty, this is scary. And the color technique and the way he blends, is this even Renaissance anymore? Is this something that maybe edges into modernism? Perhaps. So why is it that we focus on these three great masters? Well, because it is true that although there is lots of quality and quantity of art everywhere, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and specifically Raphael are gonna sort of create a clear standard. They're always gonna be delivering that standard in the right place at the right time. And I know that sounds very elitist, perhaps, but that matters. In art, that matters. Having that continuity, having that ability to leave your mark is what will make you special. And when you're able to leave that mark over and over, well, then you have a proper good thing going for you. In the case of Raphael, for example, because we've been talking about Raphael and we've sort of come to the conclusion that Raphael sort of synthesizes the great things of Leonardo and the great things of Michelangelo, many people during his lifetime essentially considered that he was the ultimate artist, painter specifically, because the new techniques became so properly refined under his work, right? Because of that, and because that captivated the mind of art historians all the way up until the Renaissance, until the 19th century and beyond, we've kind of gotten this idea that Renaissance is just what Raphael made. I'm very sorry, Zoom has you still hear me all fine? I'm just getting to I think the chat has finally opened. I think art was developing and artists were experimenting over time. 100% Mary, and that's literally the way things go. There is not such a thing as right or wrong in art. Things just kind of happen, and they don't happen overnight. They take a while to get through. So, and Giotto lives from 1266 to 1336. Unless I've made a typo in the slide, in which case my bad, but it's 1266 to 1336. So that's what the best part of 60 something years. So there you go. So that's why we are a bit biased about the high Renaissance and what makes the great masters, because the ability to identify art then gets rationalized through the standards of other societies. And up until the 19th century, that idea that Raphael was perfect and the sources from where Raphael fits himself are very important. It's Tizian. The number is the name is just here on this side. And this is from 1556. Well, we have a few more things to talk about. I wanted to obviously mention the work of Correggio, for example, which is often forgotten, but Correggio is one of the best arts of Italy in the Renaissance, and is very famous for his treatment of the nude body. We always say as art historians, if you really want to understand how to make a good nude, you need to see the work of Correggio. But Correggio comes from northern Italy, and northern Italy is gonna have a very different, again, set of standards and things that they focus on. And yet, I cannot say that this is any better or worse than, for example, I don't know, the entombment. I may like it better or I may like it less. But remember, your preferences don't necessarily mean that something is better or worse. And with art, there are ways that we can be objective, right? In terms of quality of execution and things like that. Technicalities we can argue about all day long, but beyond the technicality, everything is subjective. And it's something that I really want to emphasize here for you guys. The fact that often there is no right or wrong answer. It's just, the the way we perceive them. And well, it's it's Correggio and the Parma School, etc., etc., etc. There are many different trends of art in Italy during the long Renaissance, proto-Renaissance, early Renaissance, high Renaissance, and I haven't even gone into mannerism because our great artists end right as mannerism is starting to become the trend, right? But one of the things Caravaggio is doing is becoming a rebel against the forces of mannerism that will be really taken over from the later stages of the 1500s. So is mannerism Renaissance or is it something else? It's the typical conundrum that we have with art history, and I really would like to encourage you to see it as something a bit more fluid, because there is going to be elements from Renaissance that will seep into Baroque art and elements of Renaissance that will not fit within the general idea and framework of Renaissance itself. Right, I have a few questions on the chat. I'm gonna try to address those before we move on to the next slide. I think that it is a mix of, yes, and the culture and the region are very important because, again, remember, Italy is not a monolith at this moment in time. After the 1559 is different because the Italian wars will come to an end and the hegemonic powers of Italy will create a balance. So the Italian culture overall will become a bit more mixed together. But the majority of the time, that's going to happen because there are going to be external forces exercising pressure on Italy, mostly Spain and France, let's be honest. So in order to keep away the invader, you try to generate a sense of cohesion. But even in this day and age in Italy, there is a huge difference between North and South, even amongst Italians. So it is part of the country's own culture and their own dynamics in that regard. So yes, and I think you are 100% on the money in there, Dominic. And yes, Hirofomi, 100%, there is a relationship between Protestant reform and the Renaissance. The majority of the artwork we've been seeing here is all Catholic, because remember, Italy remains a heavily Catholic country. But North Italy, for example, is going to have a lot of regions that are going to be in contact with Protestant church. And that will shape their art into a completely different way. So something else to keep in mind. Tintoretto, I think, is many, yeah, and earlier Van Gogh, yeah, I think, Julia, I think that's a very, very nice observation. And the same thing, it is a lot of modernism. There is a lot of modernism in a lot of these classical pieces of art. So I'm not saying that the term Renaissance isn't useful. I'm just saying we need to be careful how we apply them. What is mannerism, Melissa? Well, that brings me to the next slide. I'm very glad that you asked. It's not actually on the slide, but while I address Melissa's question, I want you to do a quick recap and see if between the four, if between all of us, we can remember what are the four main key developments in art that you remember from these pieces that will become the key techniques of our artists and that will make Renaissance art a cohesive style. While I wait for your answers, I'll explain. Mannerism is the trend in art that starts becoming popular towards the later stages of the 1500s. We see precursors of mannerism in Leonardo, in Michelangelo, and in Raphael. But mannerism is the style of Renaissance art where we have exaggeration of the body shape, so it becomes terribly elongated. The shapes are always twisted, they're very dramatic, very animated, and the colors are very saturated. That's what we normally perceive as mannerism. So that's normally what we perceive as mannerism, not always. And color blending, excellent. Very, very glad to see that. Yes, their talent is important. Yes, exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Dominic, because the support of a wealthy patron is everything. Those of you who have done the lecture on Botticelli with me, you may remember the man ends up penniless, despite having been at one point one of the main artists for the Medici family. And what happens to Botticelli when the Medici disappear from Florence? Why does Leonardo end up in France? What happened to the Sforza? Techniques, sfumato, perspective, proportion. Julia, very beautiful. We're missing one. Let's see if we guys can think of the last one. And it's not a technique that is unique to the Renaissance, but in the Renaissance it will become very important. What is the big change in, yes, to create 2D? What is the big change to create that dynamism? The thing that I love so much. Thank you, Pat. The chiaroscuro. Perfect. You guys got it. You're entirely on it, guys. So thank you so much for that. Here we go. So this is overall the 4 pillars upon everything that we've discussed is built on. So we have the linear perspective. These are the most important changes, right, into the typical Gothic kind of art and what we see in the Renaissance. The linear perspective is what allows us to have that sense of depth from Giotto's theatrical, I guess, sets to remember the linear perspective of the Last Supper, to the linear entombment in there, all of the different compositions that make these pieces so dynamic. Then we have symmetry. Symmetry is so important. Remember, why does Raphael have 9 muses and then 9 humanists and 9 poets? Because it all has to be symmetrical. And in the same that I use this example, I could use so many more. In the Last Supper, Leonardo breaks down the apostles in groups of 3, right? To keep Jesus in the middle. Then Michelangelo is gonna be dealing with symmetry in a different way when he's dealing the last judgment. He starts creating all of those groups of people in a way that it's hierarchical, so that we understand the order of things. And then we have the two main techniques that will become the buzzwords of the Renaissance, but that are not just used in the Renaissance. They will become crucial moving forward, which is sfumato and chiaroscuro. So remember, what is sfumato? Sfumato is the technique for the color blending, which essentially means the colors from two different colors or 2 different shades get blended so smoothly that you cannot see the transition between each of them. Remember the smoky, because sfumato comes from the idea of fumo. Fumo is the idea of smoke. So think of the smokiness, the haziness, like blending in makeup, the same idea. And chiaroscuro is that chiaro, oscuro, the transition from light to shadow. It is those gradients of light that is what's going to allow us to add to the symmetry and the linear perspective and get one step further and one step closer to those more realistic, to call them something, images of the Renaissance that we have now in our heads. And that is essentially the end of the contextualization. So the chat is open, of course, so you're welcome to carry on. No problem in there. I'm dropping the links one more time for the donations on PayPal and Stripe and the upcoming tours. So I hope this has helped, if nothing else, to understand that terms are useful as long as we use them within the right context and as long as we are aware that they are not, one size fits all. You're welcome to ask any more questions that you may have. In the meantime, we still have a few more moments, but I hope that this has given you a good insight. Now, Somebody was asking me the other day, why did I choose Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael? Well, because at the end of the day, they are masters. I could have done the lecture instead about Giorgione, Bellini, and Tiziano, but because with Tuscany being the center of attention here, we can set a standard that I think helps us appreciate everything else a bit easier. Tuscan art ends up being very samey. If you think about it, no offense to it, beautiful, but it ends up being samey. Now, because it's so powerful and so popular, we are all a lot more used to it. So by starting from that point, in common that we all have as a reference, it's easier to then break away from that and expose you to other ideas. That's the reason why I decided to go with this. And the reason why I decided to trick you to think we had been looking at all of the Renaissance for 3 weeks. And no, we were just looking at the High Renaissance so that we could understand that malleability and the permeability of these topics. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much, guys. You're very, very kind. Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that you've enjoyed it. Oh, thank you so much. It's honestly such a joy. Did the masters have students who also worked? Yes, for sure. And the workshop, the idea of the workshop is also something that becomes really important in Renaissance art, not just in Italy but elsewhere. So there are several pieces where that we've had on the series where students worked. For example, from the top of my head, we know that Michelangelo actually needed students to complete the funerary tomb for Pope Julius II, where we have the Moses. It's also the same with Raphael and his school. And actually, another reason why Raphael becomes the standard of what a classical Renaissance artist should be is partially because of his workshop. Now, Leonardo and Michelangelo perhaps had a more traditional workshop. The workshops of painters normally, not just in Italy, but throughout Europe, had kind of categories, like levels of apprenticeship. And depending on how you graduated and how good you were higher and more important or lower. While, for example, Raphael seems to have really promoted collaboration and individuality a lot more for the sake of creating art faster. If he didn't have to provide as much supervision and he could create, general, baselines that everyone could do well and then let them do their thing, you can turn around more more art. It's simple as that, right? But yes, and that's the reason why, Anne, for example, when we're looking at the early pieces of Leonardo, we are careful as to whether he did them still while working in the workshop of Verrocchio or him as a fully fledged artist. So yes, you had to graduate by not necessarily just being able to create your own piece of art, but definitely holding your own as an artist without your master having to come and do retouches or intervene a lot in your art, if that makes sense. And not always. Some workshops had other ways of doing it. Some workshops simply graduated you when someone just offered you a job, and that was it. So it's different, but yes, it kind of worked like that. Oh, thank you so much, guys. You're very kind. We will be working on more stuff for the free academy. We're of course waiting to see how the first lot of courses have gone. But if you guys have enjoyed not just this, but any of my colleagues' courses, please do let us know. The organizers are very, very receptive to your feedback because we want to provide stuff that you guys want. And actually, on this subject specifically, if you've enjoyed this, please, please, please go to check some of the tours and some of the lectures of my colleague Patrizia. Patrizia is a wonderful art historian. She's a wonderful tour guide. And she's actually in the region where a lot of these things happen. So you will learn so much from her. So please do go and check it out, of course. No worries, guys. Thank you so much. Honestly, it's very kind of you. I'm also aware that we're running out of time. So let me see if I can catch up with some of these. Marianne, thank you so much. I think if possible, we would like to do maybe one moving into the Baroque. Well, I would love to do one about the Baroque. As you guys know, some of you know, Baroque is my favorite period in art history. So I would love to do the same for Baroque. No problem. We can do this all day long. So, I would definitely love to do that. Not an issue. Thank you so much, guys. Very, very kind words. And oh, Dominic, thank you so much. Thank you, Cindy, as well. It's very, very, very lovely to hear you guys talk about this. But in general, whether it is within the academy or not, I am working on a few lectures like the ones we've done on other art pieces for, further timelines. It's just I need a little bit of time to actually get down to them. But I'm working on producing one on Velázquez, because then that bridges out the Spanish Golden Age with what we've got going. Baroque at the end of the day. You see where I'm going with this? I want to do Van Gogh, of course, and Gustav Klimt, who are also two of my other favorite artists. I know some people have asked me to push into the 20th century, but I'm very apprehensive about 20th century art. But if you really want to take it all the way to modernity, I will be happy to push into those less comfortable areas on my behalf so that we can learn together. Because to me, this is honestly joy. And I'm glad that you guys are enjoying it because I love art history. I hope you know that. I hope you realize that. And, in this world, I'm sure I don't need to tell you how the world is in this day and age, guys. But in this world where we have so much horrible things happening, and in history where things are happening that are awful left, right, and center, this kind of stuff is what gives me hope that we can be better. Because if people in Italy, in the middle of all of these terrible wars and in the middle of the Black Death, misery all around, could still create these beautiful things, then maybe there is hope for us too. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit romantic, but there we go. I've missed the Malta tours. Well, Ellen, we don't have any more live tours from Malta right now, but I have a lot of recorded footage that we are going to be showing once I'm back in the UK. I also have my own tours outside of World Virtual Tours. And actually, on that regards, if you have any questions about this, you're very welcome, everyone, to contact me on my email, which is info@travolutiontours.com. I'm just dropping it there because I appreciate some of you have contacted me with questions after class. I forgot to put it on the slide, so my bad. But yes, you can contact me in there anytime. El Greco, thank you. Someone loves me very much, wanting me to work on things that I want to do. I would love to do a whole session of El Greco, and Impressionism, I think, is wonderful too. So I'm glad to see that we're all on the same page, guys. Very, very good. Thank you so much, Gloria. You're very kind. And well, on that note, guys, this is actually, as far as we go today, I'm afraid, and as far as we go in this specific course. But honestly, it has been my absolute pleasure. I am here for any questions that you have. Please do not be shy. I do mean it. Contact me with my email. If you cannot find my email, you can always contact the organizers for mine. It's absolutely a pleasure. And one last time, I'll add the links in there for the donations through PayPal and Stripe and for the upcoming tours. And if you're joining me with the last of my academy courses, I'll be seeing you on the 23rd or on the replay, which will be available for a week, to understand more about the Normans and their worlds. So during that, we're going to be looking at the Normans in Normandy. So you're going to see how a lot of things come together again, particularly for those of you coming from the Vikings and their sources. The Vikings are coming back, but to Europe in this case. And we're going to be talking about the very famous Norman conquest of England in 1066. But before we get to 1066, the Normans were here down in the south. They were here in Malta. So once again, you will see everything coming together. Thank you so much for all of your amazing comments and your consideration. And I really hope that you have a lovely time. And if you cannot join me in the future for any of the upcoming holidays, I really hope that you have a very blessed time and that you take very good care of yourselves, guys. It's been my pleasure, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.